All right. So today we're talking about NVIDIA. NVIDIA earnings are this Wednesday, coming Wednesday, 20th of November. And all very excited. I wanted to make this video a slightly different version of what we've done in the past because this is not an earnings recap. We'll talk less about numbers, focus a bit more on what the promise is, how the company is different from competitors, what its history is, how the co-founders have worked to make NVIDIA what NVIDIA is today. And I was reading upon this very important kind of a idea, thought. A lot of investors, a lot of private equity funds, a lot of entrepreneurs often focus on the idea of having economic moat. While I agree that economic moat is important, a lot of them also tend to forget that economic pivots are equally important. You cannot have an economic moat and sit on it for the next 10 years. Eventually, an economic moat will become a difficulty, a challenge that they have to face. And if they do not pivot, if companies do not pivot, they're doomed to fail. A very good example on this is Kodak. There was a time when I guess my parents, Kodak for them, cameras for them is Kodak, films for them is Kodak. Everything related to image processing is Kodak. They had those reels, films, everything was Kodak. But over the years, just the inability to adapt to how the technology changed, frequent leadership changes, no vision. There is not any kind of imprint that Kodak has on the image processing industry right now. Everything's overtaken by bigger corporations. The companies eventually come down to nothing from it being one of the biggest and giant players in the industry. So it's very important to pivot. It's very important to realize that some things are not working, and you need to change the focus. And in NVIDIA, the one thing that I've seen over the years, and while I was researching for this episode, the one thing that stayed constant throughout is how NVIDIA has managed to pivot from one technology to the other, change the use case. Left, right, center, they've done it all. They're visionary. They know what the next thing is going to be in 10 years' time. And they work and pivot. If the requirement is such that they need to pivot their business processes, they're comfortable doing that. And we'll see when we talk about the history and how the company's evolved. It all started in the 1990s. Very exciting times for computing in general. Personal computers were on the rise. The CPUs back then were a very big hit. Central processing units, the brain of the computer. The graphics were not so demanding, so you could actually have the CPUs, kind of handle everything. The processing, the brain, being the brain of the computer, but at the same time also processing images, animation, stuff like that. Obviously, it's not high-level imaging, but high-level graphics processing, but it could still handle it. But the technology it used was something called serial processing, and we'll try to understand a bit about it in the next couple of minutes. But it used serial processing, and it was very slow. It was very inefficient. The idea that NVIDIA was kind of started on was to create a chip that could handle, the graphics, the multimedia angle of computing in a much more efficient manner with something called parallel processing. Now, to understand what serial processing versus parallel processing is, let's say, Moise here has a 1 hour video that he wants to render on his computer. If it's just the CPU, if he doesn't have a GPU, what the CPU will do, not the more recent CPUs, but in the past, when a video was supposed to be rendered using a CPU, a 1 hour video was, rendered frame by frame. So the first frame being processed, then the second frame being processed. The third frame could not process if the first two frames did not process before it. So that's serial processing. It isn't dividing the entire video into any kind of sub-tasks, so to speak. But if Moise adds a graphics processing unit, a graphics card to the entire thing, a 1 hour video will now be split into 60 sub videos, 1 minute each. And each video can be worked on in in tandem to each other. I mean, parallelly. It is not kind of conditional on, okay, the first half of the video needs to be rendered and then the second half. They both run parallelly, and therefore it is more efficient, and there's higher chances of you being able to generate better videos, a higher quality video, rather than depending just on a CPU. That's why graphic cards are kind of mandatory nowadays, and um, you know in places where video editing is required, in jobs that video editing is required, and you need to have a graphics card. It just makes the entire process much more smoother and efficient and less time consuming. So the idea was this, that they need to come up with a chip that handles the graphics better, reduces the time it takes to render these graphics, and can handle parallel processing. Now, um, the idea, even though the idea was kind of visionary, the world wasn't ready for it, and we'll see why. 1993, NVIDIA was founded by Jensen Huang, two other co-founders. It all started at a Denny's diner. $200 was put in by Jensen Huang. That gave him around 20% of equity. Called in a lawyer friend, kind of drafted up the incorporation, and the company was set up. The first investment alone was $20 million. Now, you have to remember, this is the 1990s. There was the internet boom, but even securing like a 20 million just based off of an idea, they didn't have any products, they didn't have any term set up, they didn't have suppliers, customers, maybe a bit of market research, but nothing more than that. It was huge, and they secured this 20 million from Sequoia Capital. So they know that they're dealing with the big players here. And there is a very interesting story on how they secured this funding, and it just goes on to prove the ingenuity of the co-founders and how dedicated they were to the art. All these co-founders had really amazing histories. Like, they worked with big names like IBM, AMD, Sun Microsystems, which was big at that time. So they had illustrious careers. Jensen Huang was actually the principal engineer at a company called CSI Logic. And CSI Logic actually was an investment by Sequoia Capital, which earned them almost $150 million. And this is way back in 1993. So Sequoia was willing to bet on Jensen Huang and not the idea. Jensen Huang was the reason the $20 million was given to NVIDIA to work on the project. A fun fact about NVIDIA, the name, how NVIDIA kind of had its roots. NV in NVIDIA stands for next version, or next vision, as some people want to call it. But and it also comes from the Latin word invidia, which means envy, and green is the color of envy. So the whole idea was they would be the envy of all the other competitors with the vision that they have and the products that they plan to sell. That was the vision behind naming the company NVIDIA. But yeah, I mean, the stage was all set, right? I mean, they had the funding in place. They had three very important co-founders. They had a team. The first chip that they came out in way back in 1995. It took them 5 years to have the whole thing set up. But 1995, the first chip comes out, utter disaster. The chip completely fails. They managed to secure a deal with Sega to have their chips exclusively built into their gaming consoles. And mind you, 1994 was when the first PlayStation arrived. So it was actually competing with the PlayStation. But the NV1 chip was an utter disaster. Sega games back in the day during that time were completely outdated as compared to the PS1 games, the PlayStation games. The failure was so bad, like Diamond Multimedia, the parent company that actually bought all these chips from NVIDIA, they returned all of the 250,000 chips that they had in stock back to NVIDIA, citing that the sales are low and that they got really bad support from NVIDIA. So the first step was a complete disaster. And this, I feel, was the first moment in time in their history that they had to pivot. And they did that. There is a very famous story of Jensen Huang going up to the Sega CEO and offering them bonkers deal. He said, "I want to get out of the contract with Sega," because they had a multi-year contract. So he said, I want to get out of the contract, but you'll have to give me full payment. Any CEO in their right minds will just dismiss this, and but in a very generous act of kindness, the Sega CEO agreed. He paid Jensen Huang the entire contract amount, allowed them to exit the contract. But then Jensen realized that this is the time that the company is to pivot. They fired almost half of their workforce. It was 80 people at the time, just 40 remained. And then they pivoted into PC graphics. As we know it today, like NVIDIA, in my time back when I used to play video games on my PC, NVIDIA was a big thing. PC graphics, they started working on it. Their first chip was the GeForce 256, worked tremendously well for the company. Then they were able to secure a multi-year contract with Xbox. The first Xbox had NVIDIA chips in them. And then from there on, it's just pivot after pivot after pivot. They found a very interesting opportunity in the cryptocurrency space when there was crypto boom. I remember, my cousins had this crypto rig, mining rig, where they could easily kind of have 3 NVIDIA graphics card, and then that could mine throughout the day. And when the cryptocurrency boom was happening, the stock price on NVIDIA, we should actually check this out. It just boomed like crazy because all these people were using these graphics processing units that ultimately were found to be more efficient than having just a CPU to mine Bitcoins and other coins. But then there was the crypto crash. The company actually, the stock fell down so much because now crypto mining wasn't the interest of people, and because of this, the company had to pivot again, and that's when the AI thing took the forefront, and now the exclusive growth driver for NVIDIA is AI. I believe that this is the barometer with which a company should be analyzed and judged, is how quick are they to realize their mistakes, how quick are they to pivot from one opportunity to another and not stick to just one idea or one thought. Another great example of companies failing to do that is Intel. Once Intel was so famous for its chips. Again, constant leadership changes, very less innovation on their part, just means that Intel is no longer the player that it used to be. And that's what sets NVIDIA apart. In 2012 is the year of the AI, as it is termed. A very interesting story. There was a competition in the US, and there was this Russian engineer, Alex, the first name I remember is Alex. He used these NVIDIA chips back in 2012 to decipher color codes and predict the next code and sequence, the next color in sequence. This was the first use case of NVIDIA chips being used to predict something a lot like machine learning and predicting these algos. This is way back in 2012, and ever since, just NVIDIA has been pumping money into this AI boom, and it is here for years and years to stay. I also want to talk about their workplace culture, which is very different from a lot of these multinational IT businesses. For example, like I remember in COVID, it was Google, Meta, Microsoft, all these companies were firing people. And if you remember, I talked about NVIDIA firing almost half of their workforce when the first chip failed. They learned from that mistake. They realized that the importance of having a good team, a good set of engineers is the key driver that will allow them to make the next innovation. In COVID, NVIDIA was only one of the few companies that promised that they will not fire people. They will not fire these engineers. In fact, they offered raises to these engineers during COVID, on top of all the health benefits that obviously all companies rolled out. But it was one of the few companies that invested heavily in its resources during a time like COVID. The same principle holds true in innovation as well. So, for example, in 2008, NVIDIA came up with the Tegra 1 chip. This was a chip that they planned to use for smartphones. It didn't work out. But instead of firing that team, he asked them to stay on and work on projects that actually interest them. They gave, he gave them the opportunity of coming up with ideas that they want to work on. And that same team was a team behind developing Tesla chips later on that kind of allowed Tesla to go autonomous driving mode. So it just goes on to show what kind of workplace culture there is at NVIDIA. I love NVIDIA as a company, not because it is focusing on the AI part. It is the main driver behind AI. Obviously, that's the case. But historically, it's been one of those companies that realized the importance of the true, factors that drive growth: their employees, their ideas, and the dedication that they have to kind of combine these two and realize those ideas. They are into healthcare now. That's another very important space where I feel that NVIDIA can contribute a lot. Using NVIDIA chips, these the fastest DNA sequencing was done. This was under 5 hours. A whole set of DNAs were sequenced and diagnosed. This is actually used for diagnosing, illnesses like cancer, and a lot of cancer research institutes have these computers, these supercomputers that make use of NVIDIA chips. What this does is this reduces the time it takes to diagnose these patients, and now the cancer research institutes could spend more time on developing cures for these illnesses rather than just spending a lot more time on diagnosing them. So I feel that they're the next kind of. They're not next. They are here. They are here to stay. I believe that the company itself is doing something that's very noble, the pursuit of technology. And in one of the recent interviews, Jensen Huang said that the IT industry has been making use of the Moore's law for years, where it's like, okay, the technology evolves 5 times every 10 years, 2 times every year, stuff like that. But the rate at which technology is growing right now, it's very important for companies to be very agile. They cannot sit and not innovate, because the technology is growing at a rate of 4 times every year. So if you do not innovate, you're just left behind. They have a new set of chips that they've rolled out. They've got chips planned out 5 years in the future. I feel that overall, the NVIDIA business is something that I'm really interested in. Interested to see how the next 5 to 10 years would look like. Not just for NVIDIA, but for the general public. Things are going to change. OpenAI changed it. ChatGPT changed it. The way we look at work. And I feel that, and NVIDIA's done that in the past. NVIDIA's changed how we look at gaming industry, for example. Gone are the days where it's like 256-bit, 32 pixel games. And now you have like futuristic, quite realistic and VR games that are powered by these powerful chips. So I feel that NVIDIA is a good bet to play on for the next couple of years. That's from a fundamental standpoint. There are a few risks that I want to talk about, but we can discuss on that once we take a look on the charts, see what the numbers are talking about. Then we'll come back to talking about the risks.
Perfect. Thanks, James. I have some questions as well. I wanted to just ask you as well. When investors are considering NVIDIA for their portfolios, you mentioned a couple of names such as AMD, Intel. Obviously, you have Taiwan as well, the semiconductor manufacturer there. What would you say is, up against NVIDIA as a valid competitor in this space? Is it the, Taiwan semiconductor business? Is it AMD? Is Intel going to make a comeback? Or because you mentioned the workplace culture, the agility, the ability to stay ambitious, the learning lessons from past experiences that Jensen Huang has had. And, I can see from his work ethic, he's just very hardworking, ambitious, but he's also practical. He understands that there are limitations if companies do not continue to innovate. So what would be some comparables that investors would be able to look at?
I mean, the semiconductor industry itself, very bullish on the semiconductor industry as a whole. I wouldn't put. I mean, the closest competitor, in my opinion, would be someone like Foxconn or AMD. The reason I don't put TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor company, as a competitor is because TSMC is the supplier for most of these companies. NVIDIA does not manufacture any of its chips, which was surprising to me at first because you would imagine someone like NVIDIA, some company like NVIDIA, to actually be in the manufacturing business. But they're not. They are in the design business. They design all these AI chips. That's what they're good at. And then they outsource all these decisions on manufacturing and manufacturing timelines on TSMC. And TSMC also makes chips for AMD. TSMC also makes chips for hundreds of smaller semiconductor companies around the world. I just want to pull up some of the stocks here on my screen. Let me just pull this up here to show you why I'm extremely bullish on on this industry. Let me share the screen. So here you can see that TSMC, if you look at the 6 month chart, the 1 month chart, the company, the company is underperforming 4-5%. Let's change that to, if we look at AMD, for example, again, down 13%. Let's look at Intel, for example, although again, I don't see Intel as a competitor, but it's up. It's up 8%, but down another 7%. This past week and the whole month has not been so good for the industry as I feel that a lot of investors are just booking profits just before all these companies come out with their earnings. So a bit of a fair kind of a safe play on their side. But this gives us an excellent chance on grabbing up these companies at kind of low valuation and low prices. I feel that the closest competitor would be AMD because AMD's been here for a long time. AMD was there even before NVIDIA started, and in fact, Jensen Huang actually used to work at AMD, or one of the co-founders used to work at AMD. So they're there in the business for long. So I think the closest competitor would be AMD. But another statistic that I was actually baffled by, and in 1995 when NVIDIA actually started out, there were 89 businesses in total, approximately. Let's round it off to 90 or 100 odd businesses that were operating and were vying for the top spot in this industry, the graphics processing industry. So to speak, I mean, it's not a idea that was unique. That was, no one had heard of that before. But today, only two of those companies are in the market still, and that's AMD and NVIDIA. All the 89 other 87 companies have failed, have shut down, some kind of operational inefficiencies due to leadership changes, whatnot. But it's just these two that have stayed on. So I feel like putting any other company right now against NVIDIA would be unfair to them. AMD's been in the business. AMD knows what it takes. And even if we talk about the graphics processing on the gaming side, AMD is still there. They have their own CPUs. They have their own GPUs. But that being said, I'm bullish on the entire semiconductor industry because there are use cases not just for something like a AMD and an NVIDIA that focus primarily on AI now, whereas something compared to Foxconn, for example, that deals in producing these chips for smartphones. For example, like Apple has all its chips done by Foxconn. So, it's just the entire industry is going in for a bull run for me. But my front two horses would be NVIDIA and AMD.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think it's a good time here to check the charts out for
Yep.
NVIDIA. I'm just going to pull up the screen here. Okay, there we are. Okay, so this is the chart for NVIDIA on the daily. So one of the key aspects, as James, you mentioned this week, is the market has been tough. It's consolidated quite a bit. In fact, we can zoom in a little bit here and sort of see this consolidation area when it comes to the market. This is just going to show how the entire sector, or the overall market, and NVIDIA being the highest market cap and such a valuable company, gets impacted also as a leader, but also brings down other companies in the market. So overall, it's been consolidating quite a bit here, but things are still looking really promising for NVIDIA. So sort of taking a seat and understanding the general trend from the daily chart here, we can see that it's trending above the 200 moving average, which is this purple line here. It's also above the 50 moving average, which is the gray line, and the 20 moving average here, which is the blue line. What I particularly like about NVIDIA this week is, despite its consolidation, it's managed to hold and close above 140. To be specific, it closed at 141.98. So this was the red candle that opened right about here, made its way a little bit higher and closed a little bit lower. But before market close, it did end up above the moving average here. So it looks pretty good. In fact, James and I were discussing, what we think the rest of the week might look like. And we had our eyes on NVIDIA. So we were looking at NVIDIA to make a move higher. And this is all-time high here. So there was a possibility that NVIDIA would break this 149.77 level. But at the same time, if we zoom out and take a look at the weekly chart, it was a little bit extended after breaking this previous pivot right about here, which is around the 141 range. So the nice thing about the weekly chart here for NVIDIA from a technical standpoint is that the volume is clear. We have clear direction towards the upside. It's healthy volume, so this buyer stepping up. On the red candles for the rest of the weeks that you see here, the two red candles for the weekly charts, not as much selling as we see buying happening. So that's a good thing. One area that I want to point out is that when it comes to the NVIDIA chart here, when you see a strong bullish move towards the upside, it's important to recognize that with this strong bullish move, you don't want to see too much of a retracement on a follow-up candle if it's taking a pullback. We're in about a 60% range here. So although that's okay, it is something to be mindful of. What I'm hoping to see here with NVIDIA, and this is just looking at it from a technical standpoint, I'd like to see NVIDIA around this area hold 140 to 142. In fact, we can sort of draw a line here to sort of see what we want to see. So what we want to see is essentially a move higher, the consolidation to occur. It starts to hold this level. And as long as it's holding 140 to 142, I would say it's a safe place to buy. But you want to wait a little bit until you see a move higher. What we call this typically in technical analysis is some form of breakout, retesting this level, establishing some strength around here. And then as soon as buyers step up, we see a move higher. And that's what you want to see. When it comes to NVIDIA's chart, the weekly is a good indicator that, okay, we're getting into this previous candle, but it's still looking all right. And if it holds 140 to 142 going into Monday, November 18th, 2024, it might be an opportunity to continue to hold. However, if you're more cautious and you would like to see if the buyers do step up, and you want to ensure that where you're entering here on the market is the right price, maybe look out to see if you will see some pullback here, because it's very possible that this blue line comes about here and we see some movement coming around here around 142. So it could pull back and start to make its way higher. So overall, if I was to look at it from a pure long-term perspective, you can't go wrong buying around the 140 to 150 range, but it would be better to buy around the 140 range. But it's possible to pull back. Overall, though, if we zoom out further into the monthly chart, NVIDIA is looking fairly strong. So what I'd like to point out here specifically is that NVIDIA, specifically in this area, it's had this breakout sort of flag pattern appear. And what this was basically signaling is that buyers wanted to come up and start to move the stock higher. Now, this candle here I particularly do like it. And the reason I like it, I'll zoom in a little bit here, is because it closed above the body of this previous green candle, which is a monthly candle, and this is the next month. Now, this month it still has about 15 days to go total, but with about, let's say, give or take 8 to 12 days left in trading. So there's a huge opportunity for NVIDIA to continue to prove itself by moving higher. So what I'd like to see here is continuation towards the upside. And this is something that we could see going into the earnings, which just to give you an idea is coming up right here on November 20th, 2024. So overall, in sum, what I do like about the NVIDIA chart is it's very clearly bullish. And if this area starts to hold, we see buyers step up and hold this level around here, around this 140 range. I would not be surprised seeing a move towards the upside. So that's sort of the technical analysis aspect of NVIDIA. Overall, looks really promising. Some things to highlight here that we've discussed. Jensen Huang is incredibly ambitious. He's had a lot of experience and he has a strong work ethic. Just hearing him speak and understanding how practical he is with the way that he operates the business, how capable he is to really work above and beyond and really show up as a leader in the business community. And overall, they've pivoted so many different markets. The crypto boom, there were some environmental concerns. The price of their chips went up crazy. They've been in the gaming industry. They're still in the gaming industry. They've been providing the leading technology for AI boom and generative AI. And now with autonomous vehicles becoming more and more probable in the near future, I don't see why NVIDIA isn't a strong point. And one stock that I want to really just highlight here, another company that comes to mind is SMCI. But comparing to NVIDIA, we can see that it's nowhere close. Like, I have no idea, and I cannot tell you, because I don't fully understand the company, why it's continued to make its way down. Like, this is not good. So overall, when you're looking at an entry here on NVIDIA, you just know that you're in good hands because overall the trend is moving higher. So that's a summary of the technical analysis here on NVIDIA.
I mean, just to go back to the TSMC chart, I feel that the way they judged on their performance is completely different from how NVIDIA is judged. And TSMC has been through a lot this year just because a lot of it has to do with geopolitical risks. It operates in Taiwan. They've been behind on orders. And that's more to do with the supply side, because they have to ultimately manufacture all these chips for NVIDIA, for AMD, for Apple, for Amazon. And the list goes on and on. I mean, they produce chips for all these companies. If they go back on orders, if they fall back on orders and they have a backlog, that just means that the company is not going to do well. At the same time, that also creates problems for NVIDIA, but NVIDIA's because NVIDIA uses primarily only SMCI chips, TSMC chips. It just means that overall, I feel NVIDIA is in a much better position to handle those fluctuations as compared to stocks like TSMC. That being said, I actually wanted to talk a bit about the risks that are involved while investing in NVIDIA. And while everything is also good and rosy, and the investing community actually loves NVIDIA so much, I actually was researching NVIDIA and I just typed on YouTube, and there was not one single video that said, or even close to saying, do not invest. It seems overbought or the prices are too high. Not one. I mean, and that just proves how the investing community loves the stock. But there are some risks associated with it, and I feel the primary one right now is because of the Trump re-elections. Trump, kind of controversially, had introduced a very big tariff on manufacturing that happens outside the US. So NVIDIA would be on the receiving end of that tariff if the Trump administration chooses to go ahead with it even in this term. If that happens, then obviously NVIDIA would look to branch out and find other suppliers the Taiwanese geopolitical situation is another risk. Over the years, a lot of analysts have questioned Jensen Huang's decision of concentrating everything, all of this, kind of manufacturing only in Taiwan. Uh, Although they've constantly come out and said that, okay, they have a plan B if things don't go well in Taiwan, they always have a plan B. They've not talked much about this plan B. So that kind of makes me feel that they might not have a plan B. Or even if they have, it's just because of the efficiency at which TSMC produces these chips and the long term relationship that they have with TSMC. It's been 30 years that TSMC has been manufacturing these chips for NVIDIA ever since its beginnings. It will be a very painful switch if that switch has to happen. And if that switch happens, it not just means, very, I mean, very, very difficult times for NVIDIA, but almost the end of TSMC as a business. Because right now, if you see at TSMC, the primary growth factors are the AI chips. If that thing stops in Taiwan, TSMC as a company would, bear the brunt, but NVIDIA would also kind of fall back on its delivery of chips, fall back on its revenue estimates, and in turn, the stock price will decrease. But these are risks that one needs to keep in mind while trading in these stocks. Geopolitical tensions being the main, and the Trump administration. Although the Trump administration is a very good thing for the equity markets as a whole, I don't think companies that manufacture solely out of the US, will kind of benefit from it. They will have a kind of a chink in the armor. I also want to speak about a few news articles that have come out this past week, and it's been very interesting to read those articles. I'll share my screen here. So Elon Musk, and this is published November 15th, that is this Friday. Elon Musk's XAI, that's the artificial intelligence company, raises up to $6 billion to purchase 100,000 NVIDIA chips for its Memphis data center. I mean, Elon Musk's this XAI company's Memphis data center is the largest data center ever known to public. Although Meta's come out saying that they've got a bigger data center, but it's not public. So the Memphis data center that Elon Musk is working on is currently the biggest AI data center in the world, and they're looking to spend another $6 billion to purchase almost 100,000 NVIDIA chips. This is a very big boost to the demand in turn, and a good news for NVIDIA as they look to capitalize on supplying these chips to Elon Musk. Another news article was published around the end of October. OpenAI is building the first chip with Broadcom and TSMC, and they are looking to branch out and move out of using NVIDIA chips. Obviously, it is not an overnight process. The NVIDIA chips are much more efficient and powerful in handling all these queries that OpenAI works with, but they are looking to now shift their focus on building their own chips. Not good news for NVIDIA, but something that long-term investors shouldn't really be worried about. Now, if we talk about, other... I'm sorry, give me 1 second. If we talk about other semiconductor space players, there's Foxconn, there's ASML. So Taiwan-based Foxconn forecasted significant full-year sales growth on Thursday after posting stronger than expected third-quarter earnings, tied partly to the AI server demand. Because Foxconn primarily works in the same space as NVIDIA, a stronger outlook from Foxconn could signal a much more stronger outlook for NVIDIA. Not saying that it has a direct correlation, but one could make the safe assumption. Although Foxconn came out with much better results, it did say that it was directing investments into production sites outside China, including the US, and the US being the main one because of the likelihood of stricter trade tariffs over the coming months. The chairman said we'll be watching to see what changes there will be from the US government. That is one risk that we've already talked about. ASML, another big tech company in Europe, and what they do is they make these machines that in turn make the chips. They also kind of were extremely bullish on their outlook tied to AI demand. The CEO came out saying that we expect that our ability to scale EUV technology, that's their own technology, into the next decade positions ASML well to contribute to and leverage the artificial intelligence opportunity. Why are we discussing results and outlooks from other companies in the same space? Is because if these companies can come up with outlooks that are bullish in nature, we can only imagine what kind of outlook NVIDIA would have, because NVIDIA is using. So let's understand the supply chain here. The ASML produces the EUV lithographic technology, which is the machine, which is then used by TSMC to produce the manufacturing chips for NVIDIA. So if we go back in the kind of the chain, if ASML is going to do well, and if TSMC is going to do well, it is very safe to assume that the outlook for NVIDIA is going to be as rosy, if not more, than these other players. So yeah, I mean, overall, I feel like NVIDIA is in one of the best positions. I will be looking to add to it. It's very kind of risky to play around the earnings season and around the earnings. But if it's for the long term, I don't feel like a 5% fluctuation up and down should really worry the investor. Yeah, I'm in it for the long run. I'll be looking to add some more. I did buy some just to track it last week after our discussion, but I'll be looking to add some more just before the earnings season to capture that move up. Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Epic Markets podcast. This is James Invest.
And this is Babar Trades World.
If you found value in this episode, please do not forget to click subscribe and tune in next week for another episode and another set of insights.